Every part of the world has its legends. The Lakota believed in a powerful, burly figure they called Chiye-Tanka, or Big Elder Brother. The Eskimos called it bushman. The Colville Indians call him Sasquatch, and the Hoopas of Northern California call him Omar. In 1604, French navigator Samuel de Champlain described a frightful monster, what bears the name Gougou. In 1811, explorer David Thompson was hiking through the Rockies when he stumbled upon some seriously massive footprints. While an 1884 edition of the British Columbia newspaper called the Daily Colonist reported the capture of a young gorilla-like primate called Jacko. And in 1924, a group of miners in Washington claimed to have been besieged all night long by a troop of hairy ape-men in a chasm now known as Ape Canyon. Is it a bear? Could it possibly be some kind of giant ape? Could it even be some kind of ancient hominid? A member of the human family like Neanderthals that were thought to be extinct, or could it be a hoax? Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch. It strikes fear and the imagination. Is it real or a myth? And why haven't anyone captured a Bigfoot? With all the leading technology scientists have today, why haven't they found definitive evidence? I am your host, Marianne van Driel, and you are listening to The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. And this week I'm speaking with Idaho State University's Professor of Anatomy and Anthropology, Jeff Meldrum, about the science behind Bigfoot. Is there compelling evidence of Bigfoot being real? Professor Meldrum, welcome to the radio show of The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. As I just mentioned in your intro, you are a professor in anthropology at the Idaho State University. But for our youngest listeners, what is anthropology and how does one become an anthropologist?
Well, anthropology is the study of man, and there are a couple of ways to become an anthropologist. I became one in the non-traditional, well, what now is a viable alternate pathway. Originally, there was a very traditional approach that encompassed the four major disciplines under the umbrella of anthropology: social and cultural, archaeology, linguistics, and physical. I did not take that route. About the time I was entering into graduate school, there was another option, another opportunity, and that was anthropologists were becoming more and more involved in the teaching of human gross anatomy at medical schools and other allied health professional schools. And so my degree is actually in anatomical sciences, but with an emphasis in physical anthropology. All my professors were largely anthropologists, but were teaching at a medical school at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, where I pursued my PhD. And so that is another route. It was particularly the discipline of physical anthropology that interested me. I was interested in anatomy, in functional morphology, in locomotion, and especially the evolution of hominin bipedalism. So, young people, I think in either of those tracks, it's important to establish a good solid foundation in the natural sciences. especially the life sciences like biology and all of its disciplines. Physical anthropologists also do even overlap somewhat with behaviorists. Primate behaviorists are often physical anthropologists as well as psychologists. And it's kind of like that. It's a very interdisciplinary field, and so has points of contact with many other disciplines as well, which makes it very exciting, because then as a physical anthropologist you can collaborate with and take advantage of techniques and methodologies from a variety of different disciplines, and you know, wear lots of different hats at different times, it seems.
Yeah.
But hopefully, you know, have expertise in skills that allow you to pursue questions in a very in-depth fashion.
Now, during a study studying for anthropologist, are you also going into the field as a student, or is it more like theory and in books and in classrooms?
Well, it depends on your particular emphasis within. So I mentioned animal behavior. One of my classmates was studying the behavior of bonobos, the pygmy chimp, and she spent several seasons in Zaire in the field collecting observational data on those species, that species.
Oh, that's cool.
Myself, I was involved in the interpretation of fossil remains through analogy to living specimens. So I spent a lot of time in museum attics and basements, in the collection rooms, sifting through cartons of skeletons, of prepared skeletons of these animals, taking measurements for morphometric analyses. I also spent time observing, though. Part of my dissertation was applying kinematic analysis, the movements of particularly the foot, but the foot in context of the overall anatomy during locomotion. So I spent a lot of time looking at animals moving in natural and semi-natural captive situations, and filming and reviewing those films and representing those graphically for analysis. One study that I conducted, the first that I was involved with as a graduate student, was an electromyographic study of a selection. Electromyography is the implantation of a fine wire electrode into a muscle to record its activity, which produces an electrical signal that can be picked up and recorded. And we were interested, humans have a very distinctive muscle, not unique, but it's we're the only species that has it in any significant percentage of the population. It's the peroneus tertius muscle in the foot. And so we were interested in what exactly did that muscle do, and why would it have been selected for in human evolution. So we did experiments on chimpanzees and spider monkeys and humans. I was actually the first human subject. You know, I had to have the experience of having those wires stuck in my leg muscles before we recruited other volunteers to do it. So it's very
that has to felt pretty terrible. Putting electrodes through your.
Well, you're producing electricity, and the only uncomfortable part was, you know, a needle, a little hypodermic needle with that electrode wire threaded through it and bent back, was inserted into the muscle and kind of hooked in there, and then removed with just the wire in place. So there was just a little bit of discomfort. It was actually the alcohol getting on the puncture hurt worse than the puncture did. So, but in any case, so there are laboratory experiments I was getting at. Laboratory experiments. Now, another part of physical anthropology overlaps with paleontology, the discovery of the collection of fossil bones from the sediments in which they were fossilized. So I also had the chance to go down to South America, for example, when I was looking for fossil New World monkeys, to Argentina and to Colombia, to the desert regions there where the strata are being exposed through erosion, and we were prospecting and excavating fossil remains of primates that way. So there are all different kinds of experiences. Like I said, I was prone to doff and don hats as opportunities arose, and so in some ways I was more of a jack of all trades than but I was expert in some. I won't say expert in none, but jack of all trades, but expert in some. But it was great to have the variety of experience, and I think that helped all of my studies to be able to draw upon the varied experiences that I had. And so, you know, students, the key is to be prepared so that when an opportunity arises, you can jump and take advantage of it and maximize the returns on that experience. And yeah, it's great. You know, people ask me, what do you do? What do you do for fun? What do you do to relieve stress? And I go to work. my work is fun. I derive my, you know, all my hobbies tend to revolve around my work. And so
it's amazing to hear that relaxation lies in one's job.
Right.
I am equal in that. I found also a relaxation in creating the magazines and doing the podcast, talking to people and exploring their theories. And theories, talking about theories,
yes.
One of your theories, or should I say the theory you have, is about Bigfoot. So I was thinking now, you say that you were, well, walking around, searching around, doing your research in cellars and museums. But how did it came about that you went from those museums to the areas where probably Bigfoot is living,
Right.
or is existing?
Right. Well, my research interests, as I said, included the evolution of bipedalism, and my doctoral dissertation was actually on adaptations of primates that dwell on the ground, whether they're monkeys or apes or early hominins. The adaptations specifically of their feet to that type of locomotion, because I was interested in how the human condition emerged from those adaptive radiations. And so feet and footprints were you know, right in my wheelhouse. And so the prospect, first of all, in the background there, the prospect of another bipedal primate was certainly an intriguing one. And then I had the opportunity to examine very fresh footprints in the ground that were attributed to Sasquatch, 15-inch human-like footprints, but distinct from human in a number of ways. And because of my expertise, because of my varied experiences and projects and so forth, I was in, I think, a very good position to evaluate this body of data. It wasn't just a single footprint. I had a long line to examine, 35, 45 clear footprints in the ground that we could observe.
And that was left behind by one single creature or animal.
Yes, a single trackway of alternating right and left footprints that it had left. It apparently was out in the nighttime foraging. We were on the edge of a national forest in southeastern Washington state, and this creature apparently was out foraging and had been spooked by probably a vehicle coming down the hill, and had you know, turned and retreated back into the undergrowth. But in the process, while it was out there in the open, had left these remarkably clear footprints on the muddy road and down across a fallow field where the tilled soil was loosened and soft enough to take a footprint. It was extremely impressive. I mean, you know, just to summarize it, it was so distinct, so clear, so unambiguous. It was either or. There was no middle ground. Either it was hoaxed or it was the real thing. And again, I pride myself somewhat in my knowledge of footprints and anatomy, and an extensive experience with anatomy. I mean, I teach human gross anatomy, and we dissect, a half a dozen to a dozen cadavers every year. That I've been doing that for the past, 30, 40 years almost, since beginning as a graduate student. And so, in addition, I've studied and dissected and documented the footprints of variety of primates, including great apes, and I've studied every hominin fossil footprint that's available. So I've got this, repertoire of knowledge that I can apply to the evaluation of these footprints. I came down squarely on the conclusion that these were the real thing, and that's when that realization sets in, and you're sitting there contemplating this footprint in front of you, and the hair suddenly stands up on the back of your neck as you realize, my gosh, a Sasquatch actually walked by here just last night.
Yeah,
they do exist, So things just went from there. I mean, that experience, that very initial experience as an academic, not just I had heard of stories of Bigfoot since I was 10 years old, but that experience set the hook. I mean, how could I walk away from this question, despite all the potential fallout due to its controversy? I mean, you couldn't ask for a more intriguing, stimulating scientific question to try to fathom.
you just mentioned the footprints being that evidence, and I was listening to a podcast of you from BYU Idaho Radio, where you said you do not believe in Bigfoot. You are convinced on based of the evidence that Bigfoot is existing.
Right.
Besides the tracks, and besides these footprints, have you ever witnessed yourself that a creature like Bigfoot was walking through the forest? Have you ever had a personal encounter with Bigfoot?
I believe I have, and I say that, and I hear there I use that word. I think I have. I'm partially convinced that I have. By that I simply mean it was uncertain enough that I can't really say with 100% conviction that yes, I've seen a Sasquatch. But we had something. We were in an area of Alberta, Canada, up against the Rocky Mountains in a very remote spot. Late at night, we had for several days now been hiking all through the countryside. We had seen 13.5-inch, 14-inch footprints. We'd had bait taken from places we had placed baits out, apples out, and we were staying up late into the evening. When we weren't out in the field, we would be around the campfire in hopes that our activities would attract the attention and curiosity of something that was leaving those 13.5-inch footprints. And as it would happen on the last night that I was to be there, something did approach our camp, and it vocalized. There was this whistling sound, this whistling call. It stayed just beyond our vision in the darkness. You could hear the brush popping and branches cracking. One member of our team was approaching it in the darkness, trying to talk reassuringly to it. I was observing everything through a night vision monocular, so I could see out into the darkness to the extent there was some light, ambient light cast by the fire and the starlight. We had no moon, unfortunately, and no other illumination. But at one point, she retreated. She became a bit anxious and retreated, the woman who was approaching. And at that instant, I was looking directly where her attention had been directed, and a figure appeared, seemed to step out of the shadows onto the roadbed and cross the road in several smooth strides and disappeared into the woods on the opposite side of the road. We were camped right on the end of a gravel road that was blocked off by a berm, and this was just beyond. And all I could see was a completely black silhouette, but it seemed to have, the shape of a head upon broad shoulders and a thick torso and arm swinging. It was obscured from about mid-thigh down, so I couldn't see its feet. The next morning, I had to leave, as I said, but some of the group were staying on longer, and they examined that hillside for possible footprints and did seem to find a trackway. No distinct clear footprints, but crushed vegetation and disturbance that indicated that something large and heavy had walked past there, right where I had seen it. So I don't know for sure. I questioned myself. At the time, I almost didn't say anything because I was so uncertain. I thought maybe I was just, the effect of the night vision and the low illumination and noise was playing tricks on my eyes. But then I thought, well, we need to investigate, so I better talk about it. So I brought it up, and we talked about it, and the rest of the group were very excited by that. And the next morning, tried to document any corroborating evidence. So maybe that's a long answer to your question, but I may have seen one.
Well, it is an amazing story. I have never encountered anything that could indicate that I saw Bigfoot in a forest, even though I live in an area in Germany that has very, very widespread forests. But you say that there was a path created, that there was an indication that something heavy and large has walked through. Did you follow that track?
They did. I had to leave the next morning, so was not participating in this. But my host, who had invited us up to this area, along with Dr. John Bindernagel, did attempt to follow it. And according to the host, Todd Standing, he was able to track it for quite some distance. It's a little challenging there because the forest floor is very green, and in this part of Alberta, the forest floor was covered with a thick layer of moss, and it was like walking on a carpet rather than walking in the dirt. And so tracking was a little more challenging. When something really heavy would walk, it would sometimes crush that down. If there was enough moisture, perhaps crush it right down to the ground, and it wouldn't rebound. But our own footprints, we'd step, and proceed, and moss would spring right back, and no trace of our having passed there.
Now this makes me think about the following: this weight, this weight of this animal or this creature. Is the hugeness or the bigness? I don't know how to describe it. So, but its feet being that big, has that everything to do with its weight? Because I cannot, when looking at evolutionary timelines of all the species on the Earth's surface, their feet or hoofs are, comparing to their body, very small. But this animal, Bigfoot, well, hence the name, of course, but its feet are so enormous. Has that anything to do with its weight? Because I can only think of an elephant, and that animal is, what does it weigh, a ton or something? So Bigfoot should weigh something in that direction. Am I correct?
Well, you are, and two other factors to bear in mind. One, Bigfoot is a plantigrade, a flat-footed animal, so the distal ends of the appendages aren't tapered into a rather compressed hoof, with fusion of many of the bones of the foot and ankle. So that is one factor. The second is that it is a biped. That is, all of its body weight has to be distributed through just 2 supporting appendages instead of 4. So, you know, another plantigrade or nearly plantigrade animal in the forest that might be a better comparison would be a bear. But they are quadrupedal, so they're distributing their weight between 4 limbs, and in fact, the number 4, and their 4-limb, F-O-R-E, their front limbs are the ones that carry the greatest weight because of the head and torso. So you're right. The challenge when an animal becomes of the dimensions of the proportions of a Sasquatch, the mass, the weight, increases geometrically, whereas the surface of the foot is only, you know, the square of the linear dimensions instead of the cube. And so their feet, their surface area is proportionately larger for their body size than a typical human. If you just took a human and stretched it up to 7 feet or 8 feet tall. I mean, we have a few basketball players that approach that, and they do have good sized feet. If you look at Shaquille O'Neal's feet, I mean, I think he wears a size 24 or 25 shoe, and so, but yet it's not nearly as big and broad because he doesn't have the bulk, he doesn't have the mass. A Sasquatch, for example, the one that is might come to mind that people are familiar with, that appears on that Patterson-Gimlin film from Northern California. Her footprint was 14.5 inches, maybe 15. And when you calculate her volume in order to derive her mass, she weighs between 700 and 800 pounds. 700 and 800 pounds. So, you know, not as big as a moose, but nearly, you know, nearly as big as a large moose. And so, yes, they're very large.
You mentioned just now this film, this Patterson and Gimlin film. Do you think that it is authentic evidence for the existence of Bigfoot? That it is like as many say, this is a hoax. This is somebody in a gorilla suit. And even there are documentaries that there are people stating it was me in that suit. I did that. We set that up. And still people keep this story, this existence of an animal like Bigfoot alive. Do you think that this film is authentic evidence?
I do, because those who assert that they are involved in the hoax, and there are multiple individuals who say they're the man in the fur suit, or that others have pointed to as being the man in the fur suit. So it must be a big suit because it's accommodating 2 or 3 people at once, according to those stories. But they have not been able to produce a suit or to replicate, you know, by demonstration, a rehearsal, a repeat of this accomplishment. On the other hand, again, as an anatomist, that's my forte. Comparative primate anatomy is, you know, one of my shingles. The anatomy that's evident in that film, combined with the footprint record. If all I had were the footprints from that site, from that event, I would be quite confident that it was the real thing. But to have the footprint record and the imagery of the footprint maker combined, there are so many aspects of that film that are extremely impressive. And what I find very interesting and convincing is the fact that it was in 1967. This is 50 years ago. So we've had 50 years of time to scrutinize and to evaluate what was available and what wasn't available back then as far as the costume technologies, but also the science. At that time, the very existence of another bipedal hominid was unacceptable. It could not be accommodated in the paradigms of anthropology at that time. There could be only one species. It was, you know, borrowing from the ecology principle of one species per niche. You know, you can't have two species occupying the same niche. So it was thought that there was just one way to be a bipedal hominid with a bigger brain and maybe culture at some point, tool culture. And so this creature couldn't even exist. So when the scientists in 1967 were looking at that film, they were already convinced that it was a hoax. And they were just looking for some excuse, some rationale to justify their preconception, their prejudicial conclusion. But now, after 50 years, that idea that there can be only one is gone. We now know that the hominin family tree was bushy. It was a radiation of multiple different species coexisting at the same time across the planet, and that many of those lineages have persisted much longer in the fossil record than ever would have been imagined 50 years ago. So we've got things like, you know, Neanderthals that are maybe 20,000 years old. We have the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, that initially was suggested was only 13,000 years old. It's been pushed back a little bit, but still, even if it's 40, 50,000 years, I mean, that's just a snap of the fingers as far as geologic time. And so with that evidence of persistence of parallel bipedal hominids, why would we, in the face of so much evidence that suggests that there are things like Sasquatch, that there are things like the little orang pendek in the very areas where the Hobbit was discovered, that in Russia they have something that seems like it's a relic Neanderthal, the Alamas, and then the Himalayan Yeti, a persistent ape-like form of some kind. In the face of so much evidence, why would we reject the very possibility, you know, the question and the opportunity to study that when against this new backdrop, it makes perfect sense. We should expect such things to actually come to our attention, not reject them because they can't exist based on some preconception.
No, you should not rule out or say it is a hoax in an instant without exploring any other possibilities. Yes, today we understand that several branches of human species have lived together in the same era. I watched this movie or this short film of Patterson-Gimlin as well, and I watched it over and over and over like a detective, seeing if I could find anything that indicated that it was truly a human being in a monkey suit or a gorilla suit. And I must say, this creature is walking like a human being. But my mind went crazy in that, and I came to three little thoughts. That was one. That was one, that it is just a prank that got out of hand, or that somebody mistook a deformed tree in a foggy environment and saw it as a dangerous primordial creature. Well, it is possible. So, and the second thought is that we gained the opportunity of meeting true human evolution. And that Bigfoot is just a human, or a human species, a species of a humankind, like you and me, but still is possessing fur. Something that is better known as, and I hope I pronounced this one right, hypertrichosis, also known as werewolf syndrome. Yes. Or, well, it is also possible.
Yes.
And the third thought that came to mind was, these are just people from a yet to discover tribe who lives in an isolated form from modern society as we know it. And if the latter is true, then it is quite possible that these people are wearing a kind of clothing that is protecting them against weather, and even has the possibility to blend in with the environment they are living in. So is it a hoax that, or a deformed tree? Is it that we are meeting through human evolution, but looking back into the past? Is it a werewolf syndrome or just an Indian tribe we have not discovered? That is a long, long question.
Well, yes, and those are all very interesting hypotheses to test. I think, I mean, I'm confident that it wasn't just a prank, but that Roger Patterson did capture on film an actual creature. Now, what is the nature of that creature? That turns and addresses the other options. You know, what it is, I think will be resolved once we determine that it actually exists, and we can discuss and speculate or actually infer, even, you know, with a little more confidence than mere speculation, because I think looking at it, there are things present, but there are also things that are absent. For example, all humans that exist around the globe today, regardless of their technological advancement, have some kind of material culture. They have stuff, as well as often adornments, clothing, or whatever. And this creature seems to be absolutely devoid of that. Not only is what's seen on the film, but all of the eyewitness encounters. There's nothing to suggest that they have manufactured tools, that they have home bases, that they have fire, you know, that they have structures and so on, a complex social system. So if they are, one of the possibilities is that they are on that hominin family tree. I suggest that they're a fairly early offshoot representation, something like a Paranthropus or Australopithecine, that predates the emergence of Homo, and with Homo, man is the tool maker, right? So with Homo comes an archaeological record, which accompanies the paleontological record. There are things and stuff that they have modified, that they've employed, that they have possessed. So I think that calls into question, you know, your latter hypotheses. The hypertrichosis is always one. I mean, like you said, it's kind of the werewolf theory that some people were ostracized, were excluded from society because of their appearance, but that explanation would really only account for a very small population or an individual, not account for this not global but extensive history of people encountering such creatures with remarkably consistent descriptions of their appearance and behavior and so forth. Even the international distribution, United States and Canada, but up across into Asia. So the Chinese Yeren, I had the opportunity to examine footprints attributed to the Chinese Yeren, which has a description very, very similar. Really, the only distinction is a higher proportion of sightings describing a reddish color, reddish brown color, like an orangutan almost. But the footprints are essentially indistinguishable, remarkably so. And so it suggests that this is one species, or at least sibling species, now separated by the Pacific Ocean. So I think that would speak against the special pleading of the hypothesis of hypertrichosis or something like that. But your sentiment that we're in a way looking back at our own prehistory is, I think, not far from the mark. One of the real possibilities about what Sasquatch is, I think, is a very early hominin offshoot, like Paranthropus. So something that is just past the fork in the road, which divided lineages leading to chimpanzees and other apes on one side versus that which led to the hominins, the human ancestors and relatives, on the other side. So we are catching a glimpse. You know, it's interesting, you know, as I said, back in 1967, that image walking across the screen was foreign. It was paranormal. I mean, it was outlandish to the academicians. But now, if I were to write an introductory text in anthropology, and I needed an illustration of what a robust Australopithecine or Paranthropus looked like, I could take a frame from that movie, and if there wasn't the stigma, there wasn't already the notoriety attached to it, I could use that as an illustration of what scientists think these upright bipedal, you know, essentially bipedal chimps or gorillas looked like, and it would serve the purpose very adequately, very you know, admirably. That's interesting because we didn't know that in 1967. And yet the film actually has anticipated our current state of knowledge as it relates to early hominin evolution. And
so in a way, science has accepted the existence of Bigfoot, but a little bit with well, a curtain around it. Or...
Right. Well, yes, I wouldn't go so far as to say they've accepted. A few people like myself are convinced, but the majority will take a very standoffish posture, because there still is a tremendous amount of influence, of shadow cast forward by these earlier ideas of just a half century ago. Thomas Kuhn, who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, suggested that sometimes it requires an entire generation of scientists to die, to literally retire and die, before a new idea, a new concept can really take root. Because even though a lot of my younger colleagues are very interested, very enthusiastic about the possibility and curious, they're not in a position to pursue it without the job security of tenure, because it's still the old guard that are the journal editors, the conference organizers, the department chairmen, the college deans, and so forth. And so they are the gatekeepers for now, and will be for another 10 years, 15 years. At that point, I suspect, and I hope I'm still around to observe it, but at that point, I think that the opinions will tip. The scale of opinions will tip decidedly more favorably towards the probability that such creatures do in fact exist, if they still are around at that point. Who knows? They may be on the verge of extinction, like our relic population of great apes are endangered and on the verge of extinction, many of them.
But I assume when a creature or when an animal has survived for that many centuries, or perhaps even longer, and is capable of hiding itself that long from any species, at least humanoid species, I think it will be here as well in 2, 5, 6, 700 years. Well,
I hope so.
Besides the footprints, what evidence besides that has been found, has been examined, has been researched, and what indicates that Bigfoot is a true specimen and walking alive on this earth?
Right. Well, another type of evidence that I'm directly involved with is the examination of hair samples. Hair is often used to identify mammal species, even to identify individuals based on DNA markers. But the anatomy of the hair, it's straightforward anatomy. It's just microscopic anatomy, and there are certain characteristics that distinguish the hair and fur of other mammals, common mammals out there in the forests, with those of a potential primate. Primates have very distinctive hair. They don't have fur. They don't have guard hairs and under fur Rather, they have a modified, like our own body hair is a modified type guard hair, and it's very distinctive. These guard hairs of most mammals taper to a very fine point. They're often banded with pigments. There are different distinguishing characteristics of the medulla, the core in the center of the shaft of the hair. And primates are distinct. Primates have very parallel-sided shafts. They have a central core that's hollow, essentially, an acellular medulla. Well, I should say Sasquatch. Those attributed Sasquatch to, not all primates. That's one of the things that sets Sasquatch aside from others and helps to distinguish it. So I've identified hairs that fit what we now call the gold standard that appears to be a non-human primate in North America. But unfortunately, some of those characteristics, like the acellular medulla, make it very challenging to derive DNA from those samples. And in those rare instances where DNA has been retrieved, invariably the very brief superficial studies that have been conducted have concluded that it was human hair. Human DNA. And so that brings up two possibilities that are usually mentioned, but there's a third that goes unmentioned. The first is it's the result of contamination. The witness picks up the hair and transfers their own DNA to its surface, and that gets identified. The second is that people have just found someone else's hair or their own that has blown into the, and hair persists in the environment for a long time. Keratin is quite durable. But the third that hasn't been examined carefully yet is the fact that if we're dealing with a species that is a hominid, that is perhaps very closely allied to our own prehistory, then the difference in DNA may be very slight. Chimps have differ from humans. The values that are offered vary from 96 to 98%. I'm sorry, they don't differ by that amount. They're identical to us at that level. They differ by only a few hundredths or a few percentage points. If this creature is even more closely related to us than a chimpanzee, it's conceivable that it differs in less than 1% of its DNA. So the example I give to illustrate that, and it's very apropos because this tradition is probably started, or came from Germany, the Advents calendar, and there's a little window, a little door for each day leading 24 days leading up to Christmas, and little treat inside there. Well, imagine you had an Advents calendar that had 1,000 doors, or let's say 100 doors, 100 doors. And so if Sasquatch differs from us by 1%, then there will only be that information behind one door. But you only have enough funds, enough money, enough time to do a study that allows you to open 5 doors. What are the chances that you're going to find that one door that has the piece of information? And short of opening that door, what will be your conclusion? Every door you open looks exactly like a human. And so I think these results that, it's just a human, I think they're premature. I think it's a false result. But it costs lots of money, and you have to have someone who's willing to devote the time to do those extensive studies. Now, there are new techniques, whole genomic approaches that allow you to kind of shotgun approach to get a lot of information. But still, it's a shotgun. It's not exhaustive. It's not absolutely thorough, and you might miss that one Advents calendar door.
What, Professor Meldrum, what if somebody is knocking on your office door right now and says, we have captured a live Bigfoot, or at least a creature that is similar to all the descriptions we have to a Bigfoot. please can you come and research this or examine this creature we have in our lab, or what would be the first thing that you will examine? Why, and why is that important according to you?
Right. Well, if it's a live specimen, that's a very different proposition than if someone were to bring in a corpse, a body.
No, we're talking about a live version.
Well, with a live one, then obviously, I think the highest priority would be those things relating to their behavior, and probably foremost their intelligence, because there is this question that still rages, you know, and you alluded, is it more of an animal, or is it more of maybe a lost tribe of humans? Is it much more closely related to us than we realize? And I think that would lend itself to, you know, people who are psychologists and animal behaviorists to establish through their behavior. As an anatomist, you know, we draw affinity and relatedness by virtue of anatomical features, by similarities, by the sharing of derived traits in common. And so from that perspective, from the anatomical, of course, I would be interested to look at the foot to see if my model of their foot function is actually accurate or not.
Yes.
So there's, you know, wow, there's just, you know, many different things that could be examined, but you asked for the first one, and so that would be the first one for me.
Even though it's just a wish thought, it is an amazing opportunity when that would be there.
Yeah.
It seems that we need a lot of young people getting interested in anthropology, and I hope I pronounced this one correct, anatomy.
You're right, anatomy.
Yes. For researching these, well, creatures or yet not categorized animals living on the Earth's surface. Speaking about young people, Professor Meldrum, do you have any additional advice for young people and or fresh students who like to study anthropology, but gives them the opportunity, among others, to explore the myriad stages of human and animal evolution?
Oh, definitely, they need not limit their curiosity to just anatomy, the discipline of anthropology, because as I suggested, the study of human evolution and evolution generally, primate evolution and even broader, is a very interdisciplinary effort. And so there are lots and lots of different things. When I'm frequently asked by young students, how can I become like you? How can I do what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I tell them what they should do is to select an area that catches their interest, that they could make a career in, whether it's bioacoustics, whether it's DNA, whether it's hair and fiber analysis, you know, forensic analysis, like say in a forensics lab or a police crime lab, tracking, comparative anatomy, paleontology, and, you know, something that they have a passion for, because obviously they're going to build a career out of this. And but they will gain the skills that allow them to apply those skills to the study of some aspect of the Sasquatch. You know, it's like you said, if you had a live specimen set there before you, you know, I can think of dozens of different experts that I would invite to come and examine and study. And then I tell them they need to establish their career and their tenure, if they're in academia, to have that job security, which allows them to undertake the riskier, more fringe or controversial topics, and do it from a position of authority. they've established a reputation, and their credentials are known, so that when they then turn those skills to this controversial question, their credibility and character can't be called into question. I was idealistic enough to think that this was an amazing question. Who would ever turn away from the opportunity to study such things? And never anticipated the degree to which there would be pushback and ridicule and prejudice against what I was trying to accomplish. So it's, it could have cost me, it could have derailed my career, because I dove into the deep end of the pool before I had tenure. And I almost didn't get tenure because of it, because of this subject. That was the only justification. And it was done, very unethically, I believe. But in any case, I weathered it. I've survived it. I'm now a full professor, and I believe I'm respected. I'm not in the very center of the fray of all these topics, but if there's a question about Sasquatch, I'm the go-to guy. So there you go.
Anthropology, can it point out, or can it help to finding and gathering the evidence for the existence of Bigfoot? I think a lot of students will find it an exciting moment to go into the field and search for that one question. Is Bigfoot real, or is it a myth? Professor Meldrum, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. But I see that the hour is already over. But before we close out, can you tell us where we can find more information on your research, your books, because I believe you have written the books, and for people how to contact you when they still have questions for you?
Right. Well, my book, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, is I still think a foundational reading for anyone interested in this subject, and it's profusely illustrated. I'm a very visual learner and teacher, so there's like 150 figures and photographs throughout. So even if English is a little bit of a challenge, it will still be a very educational. I've also written, and especially for the young students and the citizen scientists, a field guide, which is kind of a how to identify, collect, document, differentiate, and report evidence, whether it's footprints, whether it's hair, whether it's scat, whether it's cultural imagery, and so forth. And so it's called the Sasquatch Field Guide, and those are available from Paradise K publishers. Even more important, I think, or more pertinent and current, I edit an online journal called the Relic Hominoid Inquiry, and it can be found online. Easiest way is just to Google that title, and you'll find it. But it is a peer-reviewed academic journal. I edit it. I have the assistance of a editorial panel board that is composed of academics, PhDs, and other professionals of pertinent skills and experience. And it contains research papers and essays and historical documents, translations of historical papers of other researchers of the past, and book reviews, excellent essay-style book reviews, which are very enlightening. So that's a great source. It's 10 years old now. We're in our 10th volume, essentially, our 10th year of publication. So it's been a success. And otherwise, I'm easy to find online. I do have a Facebook page that's under my full name, Don Jeffrey Meldrum. And but otherwise, email me with questions. I'm happy to field questions or hear your experiences.
Thank you all for tuning in this week on The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. Make sure to visit our website, www.nexttruth.com, That is nexttruth, all in one word.com. And let us know what you think about our podcast. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we would appreciate a rating on our website in the section The Next Truth Podcasts. Or if you would simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us too. I am Maria Anna van Driel with The Next Truth. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.